The bell rang, slicing through the late morning silence at Kingsridge High. As students shuffled into their seats for advanced calculus, Amaya Johnson sat quietly near the window, her notebook perfectly aligned with the edge of her desk. 17 years old, with hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing, Amaya wasn't just smart. She was deliberate, intentional. She had learned long ago that excellence was her sharpest armor in a world that often chose not to see her. She didn't expect applause when Mr. Coleman began passing back the tests from last week's exam. She never did. Recognition wasn't something Amaya chased. Survival was. Still, as the papers made their way down each row, she felt her chest tighten. She had studied harder for this test than any before. Every spare moment in the library, every extra question was solved in the margins of her textbook. She knew she had done well, but she also knew that doing well didn't always mean being acknowledged. When the paper landed on her desk face up, her eyes locked on the bright red score at the top. 100%. A pause, a breath, and then a flicker of something. Pride, disbelief, washed through her. She looked up instinctively, catching the expression on Mr. Coleman's face. He was staring at her, not in the paper, at her. His brows knotted, lips pressed into a thin, incredulous line. Slowly, as if narrating to himself more than to the class, he said, "This is impossible." The room froze. A few students laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Others turned to look at Amaya, then at Mr. Coleman, waiting for clarification. But his expression didn't change. "Excuse me?" Amaya's voice was quiet but clear, the syllables sharp enough to slice the tension in the room. Coleman walked toward the whiteboard, the exam still in his hand, waving it slightly as if it might combust. "No one," he said, turning back to the class, "has ever scored a perfect 100 on my final exam. Not in 7 years." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Amaya could feel the eyes on her, the shift in the room's energy. A slow, sinking realization settled into her gut. "Are you saying I cheated?" she asked, her voice firmer now. Coleman didn't answer immediately. He took a moment, folded his arms, and exhaled through his nose. "I'm saying," he replied, "that it's highly unlikely someone who's never stood out in my class could suddenly outperform every student by such a large margin." There it was, the coded language, the careful phrasing, the insinuation wrapped in civility. She felt her jaw tighten. "I have stood out," she said, sitting straight. "You just never noticed." A few seats over, Chase Whitman, the golden-haired son of a local attorney, chuckled under his breath. Brooke Ellis rolled her eyes and whispered something that made the girls next to her giggle. Amaya ignored them. Mr. Coleman walked over to her desk and dropped a blank sheet of paper in front of her with a theatrical thud. "If you understood the material," he said, "you can show us, right now. Resolve problem number 7. From memory." The classroom buzzed. A few students leaned forward, one or two smirked. Everyone waited. Amaya stared at the empty paper. This wasn't about calculus. This was about control. "If Chase had gotten 100, she said quietly, "would you have asked him to redo his test on the spot?" The class hushed. Even Coleman looked momentarily stunned. "That's not the point," he said, his voice a touch louder now. "You're making this into something it isn't." "Am I?" she asked. "Or are you making it into something it's always been?" The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier. Dense with something unspoken but undeniably present. Coleman's face flushed. "Until further notice, your score is under investigation. You're to remain after class." He picked up her original test and without hesitation crumpled it into a tight ball before tossing it into the trash. Amaya didn't flinch, but inside something burned. This wasn't just unfair, this was personal. She looked out the window, the winter light hitting her face, and whispered, "I didn't come this far to be erased." The bell rang, but no one moved. Amaya remained in her seat, her back straight, her hands resting calmly on her lap, even though every muscle in her body was tense. Around her, students filed out, casting glances over their shoulders, some curious, some uncomfortable, some satisfied. Chase gave a smug wave as he passed her desk. Brooke whispered, "Enjoy the spotlight, genius," before strutting out behind him. Amaya said nothing. Mr. Coleman stood near the whiteboard, arms crossed, tapping his fingers against his elbow. He avoided looking at her. He didn't need to. The message had been made clear. You don't belong here. You don't get to win. Not in my classroom. The silence stretched between them until the classroom door opened. The energy shift was immediate. Principal Malcolm Reed stepped inside, composed as always in his navy suit and charcoal tie. Tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair at his temples, he carried the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter without realizing why. "Mr. Coleman," he said evenly, "a word, now." Coleman's shoulders tightened. "Sir, I wasn't asking," Reed replied, his tone polite but absolute. The teacher hesitated. For a moment his eyes flicked toward Amaya, and she thought briefly that he might say something. But he didn't. He simply walked past her and out the door. Principal Reed waited a beat, then turned to Amaya. "Come with me, please." Amaya's heart pounded as she stood, grabbed her backpack, and followed him out into the hallway. The walls felt narrower than usual. The ceiling lights buzzed overhead. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have. At the end of the corridor stood Ms. Linda Nguyen, the school's guidance counselor, waiting beside a rolling laptop cart. She gave Amaya a kind smile, one that didn't feel forced. "Hi, Amaya," she said gently. "We just want to show you something." The laptop screen showed a paused video, black and white footage of her classroom from earlier that morning. Amaya recognized the familiar angles. The rows of desks, the whiteboard, the teacher's podium. Reed gestured towards the screen. "Do you know what this is?" Amaya nodded. "The security feed." He pressed play. The footage rolled forward. Students hadn't arrived yet. Coleman was alone in the room sorting through test papers. He reached Amaya's test, paused, stared at it for nearly 30 seconds. Then his lips moved, muttering something. The camera had no audio, but Reed narrated softly. He says, and I quote, "There's no way in hell she's that smart." Amaya felt something in her chest tighten. Her hands balled into fists. The video continued. Coleman looked around, paranoid, checking that no one else was there, then pulled out his phone. He typed something quickly, then stared at her paper again, shaking his head. Reed stopped the footage. "We've reviewed prior footage too," he said. "This isn't an isolated incident. He's flagged and altered grades from minority students before, quietly, but consistently." Mrs. Nguyen added, "And your exam was never flagged by the grading system. You didn't just pass. You aced questions that even our top seniors struggle with. That's not cheating. That's talent." Amaya blinked fast. Her voice came out quietly. "So, what happens now?" Reed gave her a long look, one part sympathy, one part pride. "Now we correct the story." Just then, the classroom door at the end of the hall burst open. Mr. Coleman stormed out, red-faced, walking straight toward them. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "A security video without audio? That's circumstantial at best." Reed didn't flinch. "It's evidence?" Coleman scoffed. "You're going to take the word of a teenager over a seasoned educator?" Reed stepped forward, his voice cold and clear. "No, Richard, I'm taking the word of the truth, and the truth is on tape." Ms. Nguyen stepped aside, revealing a clipboard. "Mr. Coleman, you are hereby suspended, effective immediately." Coleman's face twisted. "You can't be serious." "I'm deadly serious," Reed said. "You have 10 minutes to collect your things and leave the premises." Two security officers rounded the corner. Coleman turned, scanning the hallway. looking for someone, anyone who might come to his defense. But no one came. With one last glare toward Amaya, he turned and disappeared down the corridor. Amaya stood in stunned silence. Reed turned back to her with a small, proud smile. And you, Miss Johnson, have just earned yourself a full academic scholarship. Her breath caught. Wait, what? We've been speaking with several academic organizations, he said. They were impressed not just by your brilliance, but your composure, your clarity, your courage. The hallway was quiet now, but inside Amaya something louder stirred. Not fear, not anger, vindication. Amaya sat at the edge of the bench in the guidance office, still holding her backpack tightly to her chest. The word scholarship echoed in her mind, but it didn't feel real. Not yet. Ms. Nguyen handed her a folder, warm from the printer. This contains your official reinstated grade, letters from the scholarship committees, and a few things we'll walk you through later. But for now, just breathe. Amaya blinked down at the bold heading across the first page. Full academic award, National Science Scholars Program. Her name was printed underneath. Principal Reed smiled at her, the tired kind of smile worn by people who've seen too much but still choose to believe in change. We don't give out trophies for surviving discrimination. But when someone not only survives but rises above it with integrity, that deserves more than applause. Amaya looked up, her voice quieter than usual. Do people believe I deserve this, or do they just feel guilty? Reed paused, considering her question carefully. Some will believe, some will pretend, some will whisper, but what matters is that you know you earned it, and the people who matter most will never forget it. He handed her a second sheet, an invitation to speak at the upcoming school assembly. Wait, me? Speak? You don't have to, but we thought you might want to own the narrative. Amaya nodded slowly. Her heart was racing, but somewhere deeper, something steadier was growing. Later that day, the cafeteria buzzed with chatter. It was rare for the lunchroom to feel quiet, but as Amaya walked through the center aisle with her tray, a hush followed her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't mockery. It was attention. Whispers trailed behind her like wind. Is that her? She's the one who got Coleman suspended. She got a scholarship? Like, full ride? She aced the test? Amaya kept walking. She sat down at her usual table, center left corner, near the vending machines. She always sat alone here. Today, that changed. Two underclassmen she didn't know approached hesitantly. Hi, the taller one said. Just wanted to say, you were awesome. Thanks, Amaya replied with a small smile. More students nodded at her across the room, some she'd never spoken to. A few teachers passed by and gave her encouraging glances. It was strange, being seen so clearly. And yet, not everyone was clapping. At the far table near the windows, Chase Whitman leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, watching her with narrowed eyes. Brooke Ellis, perched beside him, leaned over to whisper something, and he laughed, low, bitter. Then Chase stood up. His voice wasn't loud, but the cafeteria seemed to tilt towards him when he spoke. So, this is what justice looks like now, he said with a smirk. Cry racism and you get rewarded. A few heads turned. Amaya didn't move. Tell us, Amaya, Chase continued. How does it feel to be the face of victimhood? Someone gasped softly. A girl dropped her fork. Amaya set her tray down slowly and stood. Her eyes met his across the room. I don't need to explain myself to you, she said calmly. Chase raised an eyebrow. Right, because you don't have a real explanation. Amaya took a step forward. Her voice never rose, but each word landed like a strike. I explained myself when I studied for that exam every night while you were out partying. I explained myself every time I answered a question in class that Mr. Coleman ignored. And I explained myself when I aced that test, fair and square. She tilted her head. The only person who doesn't understand is you. A ripple of tension moved through the room. Brooke rolled her eyes and muttered, whatever. But she didn't interrupt. Chase gave a forced chuckle. We all know you got lucky. Amaya stepped closer, her gaze steady. Where was my luck when I had to work twice as hard to be half as visible? Where was my luck when I was accused of cheating just because I outperformed the Golden Boys? Chase opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She added quietly, maybe the problem isn't that I got lucky. Maybe the problem is that someone like me succeeded where you didn't. Silence, thick, electric. Chase flushed, then turned and walked away. Brooke trailed behind him. Amaya exhaled. Around her, a few students clapped. Some offered fist bumps. One kid whispered, legend. But she didn't need their validation. She sat back down, picked up her fork, and took a bite of her salad. For the first time in years, the room wasn't a battlefield. It was hers. The auditorium filled slowly, row by row, as students and teachers shuffled in under the bright overhead lights. The buzz of confusion and expectation hummed across the room. Word had spread fast. Something big had happened. Everyone had heard bits and pieces. Coleman suspended, a test scandal, some kind of scholarship, and a girl who'd shut it all down. But no one knew the full story. Not yet. Principal Malcolm Reed stood backstage, scanning his notes while the final few students settled. He adjusted his cufflinks once, then again, and looked out at the audience. From up here, they all looked the same. Rows of youth on the verge of forming opinions that might shape a lifetime. Beside him stood Amaya Johnson. She was calm mostly, or at least that's what she told herself. Her palms were slick with nervousness, and her knee bounced slightly as she tried not to fidget. You ready? Reed asked. No, Amaya admitted, but that's never stopped me before. Reed smiled. The lights dimmed slightly as he stepped forward to the mic. Good morning, everyone. The crowd hushed. I'll keep this brief, but there is something we need to talk about, Reed began. His voice was deep, assured, and yet there was an unmistakable edge to it, a seriousness that made even the whisperers in the back sit up straight. As many of you have heard, he continued, an incident took place in one of our classrooms this week involving a student, a teacher, and a series of decisions that do not align with the values of Kingsridge High. A ripple of silence spread. After reviewing security footage and other records, it was confirmed that Mr. Richard Coleman, our AP calculus teacher, demonstrated a clear pattern of racial bias and unethical conduct. As of yesterday, he has been suspended pending formal review. Gasps, some murmurs, a few stunned expressions. Reed raised his hand slightly. Let me be clear. This is not about punishment. This is about truth. And sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. But if we're afraid to face it, we don't grow. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning row after row until they landed near the front. Miss Amaya Johnson, he said, would you please join me on stage? Amaya's heart skipped a beat. Every eye turned to her. She stood slowly, not because she hesitated, but because this moment deserved to unfold with intention. As she walked down the aisle toward the stage, a murmur passed through the room like wind through tall grass. She took the mic, adjusted it slightly, and for a moment, she just breathed. My name is Amaya, she said finally, and I didn't want to be standing here. That caught them off guard. I didn't want to find the center of attention. I didn't want my test score to be questioned. I didn't want to defend my intelligence. I just wanted to be seen as a student, like anyone else. She paused, scanning the crowd. A few students looked away, guilty. Others stared, wide-eyed. But when someone tries to take away your dignity, she continued, you don't stay quiet. You don't shrink. You stand. Her voice never rose, It didn't need to. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I didn't manipulate anyone. All I did was study. All I did was work hard. But that was too much for someone who didn't believe a black girl could ever outperform his expectations. A sharp silence. No one dared speak. I'm not just here because I scored a 100. I'm here because someone tried to erase me, and I wouldn't let them. Reed stepped back to the mic. For her excellence, her bravery, and her unwillingness to be diminished, he said proudly, I'm honored to announce that Amaya has been awarded a full academic scholarship to any university of her choice through the National Science Scholars Foundation. The room erupted. Applause exploded across the auditorium. Some students stood. A few teachers wiped their eyes. Even students who'd never spoken to Amaya before cheered like they knew her story by heart. Amaya blinked back tears, steadying her breath. She hadn't cried when Coleman crumpled her test. She hadn't cried in the hallway. She wouldn't cry now. But something soft bloomed in her chest. Something powerful. Not validation. Not revenge. Resolution. As the applause began to fade, Reed added one last thing. Let this be a turning point. Let it remind us that fairness is not passive. It must be defended. And that every student in this building, regardless of color, deserves to rise without being dragged down. Amaya stepped down from the stage into a different world than she'd stepped into hours before. She was no longer invisible, no longer just another name on a roll sheet. She was a symbol, and she had earned it. The next morning, the halls of Kingsridge High didn't feel the same. It wasn't just that Mr. Coleman's classroom was now dark and locked, his nameplate quietly removed from the door. It wasn't even the posters about equity and excellence that the administration had suddenly started pinning to bulletin boards. It was something else, something quieter, deeper. Whispers had changed. They were no longer about doubt, but about possibility. The kind that comes when someone refuses to sit quietly and instead changes the story from inside the system. Amaya walked into the library early that morning, her usual hiding place before homeroom, and paused near the back table where she always sat alone. Except today, someone was already there. Jordan Patel, a sophomore she barely knew, looked up from his tablet. Sorry, he said quickly. Didn't know this was your spot. Amaya smiled faintly. It's fine. Want to share it? He blinked, then nodded. Sure. They sat in silence for a few minutes until he cleared his throat. What you did yesterday, he said. It mattered. My little sister's in 8th grade. I told her about you last night. She said she wants to be you. Amaya looked at him. Looked. His voice didn't shake. He wasn't trying to flatter her. He just meant it. Tell her, Amaya said, that she doesn't need to be me. She just needs to not let anyone decide who she is. Jordan smiled. Before she could respond, Ms. Nguyen entered the library holding a small envelope. She walked over to Amaya and handed it to her. Inside was a handwritten note. No letterhead, no signature. Just clean, even lines on ivory paper. You were never supposed to apologize for being brilliant. Let this be the first of many doors you walk through unapologetically. M.R. She didn't need to ask. She knew it was from Principal Reed. By lunchtime, the campus had shifted again. A group of students had started taping handwritten notes across the lockers. Some said, "We see you." Others read, "Smart is not a color." Even a few of the quieter kids from Coleman's old class had written, "Sorry we didn't speak up." The most surprising thing, though, was what happened in the faculty lounge. Mr. Hollister, the government teacher, stood up during their break and said, "We failed her. Not just Coleman. We all saw how she was treated and stayed silent." And no one disagreed. That afternoon, an email went out from the superintendent's office announcing a district-wide initiative, mandatory bias training, student-led forums, and an independent review of classroom equity policies. The program would begin next month, and Amaya had been invited to serve as a student advisor. She stared at the email for a long time, not because she doubted her place, but because she was ready. That night, Amaya sat at her desk by the window, the stars scattered across the sky like punctuation in an unfinished sentence. She pulled out her journal, not the one she wrote homework in, the other one. The one that held fragments of herself she didn't always know how to say out loud. She opened to a blank page and wrote, "Dear future me, I didn't mean to become a symbol. I just didn't want to be erased. But maybe that's how it happens. Maybe the quietest fights leave the loudest echoes. You didn't win because you were lucky. You won because you knew what was true, even when no one else did, and you never stopped speaking it out loud." She put the pen down, folded the page in half, and slipped it into the inside pocket of her backpack. Tomorrow would come. More challenges, more whispers, maybe more unfairness. But now she had something no one could crumple, question, or discredit. She had a voice, and she was going to use it. Takeaway message: never let anyone define your worth. Your truth, when spoken with courage, can open doors for others to walk through freely.